The house I bought and shouldn't have bought. I've always been a skeptic. I never believed in ghosts, spirits, or anything like that. To me, it was all just imagination and stories to scare children. My view of things was pretty practical. Everything has a logical explanation. But buying that house changed everything. And no, it wasn't a financial mistake. It was I was at a point in my life where I wanted something more. I was tired of the small, boring apartment I lived in a noisy, cramped neighborhood. I wanted something quieter, something more private. That's when I found the house. It was an old property, isolated, in a small town in the countryside. When I saw the pictures online, I immediately fell in love. The house had a large garden, a rustic feel, and a grand structure. It was a bit worn down, but I loved the idea of restoring it. The price was so much lower than the others in the area that it seemed like a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. Even though my instinct told me otherwise, I ignored it. Almost every other property in the area was priced much higher, and this house When I arrived in town to see the house in person, the atmosphere was gloomy, and the little town had a decayed air. The streets were empty, and the houses around it were in a state of abandonment, which only made me imagine how special that house was. The real estate agent seemed a bit nervous, but I just assumed he was uncomfortable with the idea of selling such a big property. He showed me around the house, which was imposing but run down. The floor creaked, the walls were stained with moisture, and the paint was peeling, but I saw the potential. The large windows, the high ceilings, the huge staircase. It was everything I had always dreamed of. But there was something strange about the place. From the moment I stepped in, I felt like I was being watched. It became more evident when I went upstairs to explore. The doors were locked, but the agent casually mentioned that some rooms were closed off because the last owner, an elderly man, had locked everything before moving out. Apparently, he was a recluse. I didn't pay much attention to that, but the feeling that something was wrong grew. Still, despite the strange vibes, I decided to buy it. I needed a fresh start, and that house seemed perfect. In the first few days, everything seemed fine. I was excited about the renovation project, but soon I started noticing strange things. At night, I would feel like someone was walking around the house, even when I was alone. I tried to ignore it, thinking it was just the old house settling, but the locked doors began to open on their own. I would close them all at night, but the next day, they'd be open again, as if someone had forced them open. This happened several times, and on a few occasions, I could even hear footsteps in the upstairs hallway when I was downstairs. One night, after a long day of working on the house, I was sitting in the living room, trying to rest. I started hearing a door creaking upstairs. My heart raced, and I got up to investigate. When I reached the stairs, the hallway door upstairs was open. The hallway was dark. The shadows danced with the weak light from a lamp I had left on in the living room, but there was no one there. That's when I heard the sound of something, or someone, slowly descending the stairs. I was frozen, my heart pounding in my chest. There was no one there, but the sound was unmistakable. But it wasn't until the third day after that experience that things really took a turn. I was in the dining room, trying to organize some boxes when I felt a presence behind me. Something was watching me. I looked back, but there was nothing. I hurried down the hallway, trying to distract myself, until I found a door I hadn't noticed before. It was at the end of the corridor, almost hidden. It was a small wooden door, with a rusty lock. Something made me open it. When the door opened, a wave of moldy, decaying air hit my face. I hesitated, but stepped inside. The room was strange. There were no pieces of furniture, but the walls were covered with yellowed, torn papers. But what made my blood run cold was what was in the center of the room. A huge mirror, dusty and broken into several pieces. When I looked at it closely, a feeling of panic took over me. There was something there. Or someone. At that moment, something strange happened. When I turned to leave the room, I saw a figure behind me, reflected in the mirror. I almost fainted from shock. It was a woman. I quickly looked behind me, but there was no one. When I turned back to the mirror, the woman was closer, and her reflection was smiling in a malicious way. I panicked, ran out of the room, and locked the basement door with anything I could find. The next morning, I tried to ignore what had happened. Maybe it was just an illusion, I thought. But the fear never left. I couldn't sleep. Something was wrong, deeply wrong. So, I decided to investigate the history of the house. I went back to the real estate agent and asked for more details about the property. It was then that he, visibly uncomfortable, told me something I will never forget. The house had been sold several times, but all the sales ended in abandonment. People just leave, he said, in a low voice. There's a history of strange events in the house. Some people even said they heard voices, felt presences, but no one ever stays long. He then looked at me with an intense gaze and said, I know you don't believe in ghosts, but you should leave before it's too late. I left the house, but the feeling of being watched never left me. No matter how hard I tried to push it out of my mind, I knew that place, that house, would never let me go. The feeling that something was wrong stayed with me for weeks after leaving the house. I tried to get back to my normal routine, but the image of that mirror and the woman smiling never left me. I lay awake at night, eyes fixed on the ceiling, trying to understand what had happened. I knew I had more to discover, but I was too afraid to go back to that place. Then, one night, I received a message on my phone. It was a notification from an unknown number, a short, almost nonsensical message. She's still waiting for you. My stomach churned. I stared at the phone screen, trying to process what that meant. Who could have sent me this? I blocked the number and thought it was just a sick prank. But deep down, I knew it wasn't. Something inside me told me that house, or rather, the force within it, was still looking for me. The message didn't bring me peace. I began to search more about the house's past. I dug into old records, talked to locals, and explored archives at the town hall. That's when I found something that made my blood run cold. The house had been built in the 19th century by a man named Edmund Wraith, a famous engineer of the time. However, his name became associated with a series of mysterious events. According to old records, Wraith had lived in the house with his wife, Emily. She was described as a beautiful woman, but with an eccentric behavior. In the 1880s, Emily vanished without a trace. What startled me even more was what I found in the archives. Emily's disappearance was never solved. Some locals claimed she was last seen near the basement of the house, where strange things happened, but no one ever found an explanation for her disappearance. Curious and disturbed, I decided to go back to the house. I knew I was putting my safety at risk, but something inside me drove me to understand what was happening. I went back to the town, this time with a dark determination. When I arrived at the house's entrance, the doors were locked, as usual, but deep down I felt like someone, or something, was waiting for me inside. I entered through the back door, the one I had opened on my first day in the house, and immediately the feeling of being watched returned. Every step I took echoed through the empty halls. But there was something else, an oppressive pressure in the air, as if the house were alive, breathing. My heart raced as I climbed the stairs toward the hallway. There it was, the door I had found before, the small, rusted door, locked. I knew what I had to do. I had to face it. With trembling hands, I took the key I found in the real estate agent's office and inserted it into the lock. The sound of the metal creaking was horrific. When the door opened, a blast of cold air hit my face, as though I were entering another world. And there it was again, the mirror. But this time, something was different. The mirror was intact, without the broken pieces I had seen before. And in the reflection, there was not only my image, but something more. She was there. The woman. Emily. Her eyes were empty, as if they were an echo of the past, and she smiled, but her smile wasn't gentle. It was a vacant, cold smile, as if she knew something I didn't. Fear paralyzed me. I wanted to run, but my legs wouldn't move. The mirror began to glow strangely, as if light were being pulled into it. And I knew, in that moment, that I had made a terrible mistake. The mirror wasn't just an object. It was a door. That's when I heard the voice, weak, but unmistakable, coming from behind me in the darkness of the hallway. You should have stayed away. I quickly turned around. There was no one there. But I knew that voice wasn't just my imagination. It was there, closer now, like a presence, something approaching, taking form. The mirror began to distort, as if Emily's reflection were trying to come out of it. The air grew colder, and the house began to creak, as if it were about to collapse. Panic overtook me. I ran toward the door, but something stopped me from leaving. The door slammed shut by itself, trapping me in the room with the mirror. I knew there was no way out. Or rather, I knew that the way out I was thinking of wasn't the one I imagined. The mirror, on some deep level of my mind, had become my prison, and I realized, with absolute clarity, as I felt my breath quicken, Emily hadn't disappeared. She was in the mirror, and now she wanted someone else with her. I had only one choice: destroy the mirror or be consumed by it. With my heart racing, I searched for something to break the mirror. I found an old porcelain lamp and threw it at the glass. But when I did, the mirror exploded, and a burst of light blinded me momentarily. When I was able to open my eyes, the house was quiet, still. The weight in the air, the feeling of being watched, had disappeared. But I knew I had made a mistake in trying to destroy that mirror. Something inside it was still there, waiting. Now, more than ever, I could feel her presence. Emily, watching me. And the house, though seemingly peaceful, knew I couldn't escape from what I had done. The mirror wasn't destroyed. It had shattered, but the pieces were still intact, somewhere, waiting. And I knew that, at some point, it would come back to find me.